Shalom, good afternoon from Jerusalem, Israel. This is Mr. Lowell Joseph Gallen, founder of the Root and Branch Association Limited. Welcome to episode 30 of our weekly medical war crimes seminar hosted by seminar host Rabbi Hanania Weitzman. This is a special emergency session. Our programs are usually on Tuesdays, and we have added this one for Hanania's guest, David Waldman of the Honenu organization. And now, without further ado, let me hand over the mic to Rabbi Weitzman and his guest, David Waldman. It's all yours, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Lowell. Welcome to the program, David Waldman. And let's just jump right into it. For those who don't know,
thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. For those who don't know the story of Amiram ben Uliel and the Kfar Duma case, can you give us a very brief summary of the main points?
Okay, so Amiram ben Uliel was arrested about 6.5 years ago for an alleged crime that we're convinced that he didn't commit. There was a terrible crime committed in the village of Duma, where a family was killed through an arson attack. There were many arson attacks in that village before and after. That's one of the things that I might talk about later on. And there were a number of individuals that were arrested, tortured. One other 16-year-old kid was tortured as well, and he let off because his confession was deemed illegal because of torture. And
David, stop just for a second. David, your sound quality is very poor. Are you on a cell phone? It's very difficult to hear what you're saying.
I'll try to talk a little slower.
No, it's not. It's not the way you're talking. This is very crackly and staticky. We don't seem to have a good connection with the audio.
Let me go back one second. Is that a little better?
Not really.
Is that a little better?
It's not great.
All right, Zemayesh Benatayim.
Yeah, it's very it's very difficult to hear what you're saying. We don't have good audio.
I had trouble connecting through the internet.
Yeah, if you can find a different spot, because we can't really hear what you're saying.
1, 2, 3. Is that a little better?
No, it's not.
Okay, I'm wandering Jew. Is that slightly better?
Slightly better.
Okay, we're getting better. All right, so what I was trying to say that that he was arrested and there was no evidence linking him to this horrible crime. It was a horrible, horrible crime, only they have the wrong man, because there was no evidence linking him to any part of this crime. And he was held for 21 days, according to Israeli law. They cannot let a lawyer see a client in an emergency situation for up to 21 days. And for 17 days, he didn't know what they were talking about. After 17 days, the intense interrogation started, torture, in other words. And he was convinced he was made an offer he couldn't refuse. And he started talking, and the confession that he made didn't fit the facts, and they spoon-fed him a confession. They admit all this, that there was no evidence connecting him to this crime, and they say that this confession was part of the confession was thrown out by the courts, but a small part was left, and on the basis of that, he was convicted. There are many people in the country, not necessarily on the right wing side of the political camp, that are very, very against the conviction and of Amiram, because they are against torture methods for everybody, for Arabs, for Jews. We personally at Honenu are against torture for anybody. There is a small caveat if there's a bomb ticking away. In other words, if torture can stop an immediate threat to human life, there is a small caveat, but in principle we are against it. And the only evidence that convicted Amiram is this torture confession, and it's perfect timing for our discussion today, because right as we speak, the appeal of Amiram is happening right now in the Supreme Court in Jerusalem, where his lawyer, Victor Feldman, he happens to be arguably the best lawyer in Israel. In some circles, say that, and he is a very left-wing politically, and it doesn't matter because he's convinced of the illegality of the conviction, of the illegality of the torture used, and we're all hoping that all this that we're doing, including the discussion today, will create an atmosphere that will let Amiram back to his family, his wife, and his 6-year-old daughter that he hasn't seen in almost 6 years.
Well, first of all, I'm very glad that you brought up the point. I didn't know this, that his main lawyer is actually left wing. I was not aware of that. I was going to ask you why is it that it seems that the human rights organizations, and they probably are not, don't seem to be taking up his cause in the more left wing segments of the society. They're always talking about human rights and prisoner rights and everybody's rights, and they don't seem to be taking up this cause. Do you find that at least in the last several years that has changed, that there's been more unity in terms of dealing with this case and with the larger issues of torturing prisoners or even people that they're taking into custody?
Rabbi Weissman, that's a very, very good point. I actually, right before I got off call on this Zoom, this important discussion with you all, a woman that represents there's an organization called the Society Against Torture in Israel. Believe it or not, there's an organization like that. And these people are trying to get the Israeli army from stunning to interrogation methods against Arabs in Judea and Samaria, and they're against extreme interrogation methods. And this particular one wrote a long article today in Haaretz. Haaretz is a very left-wing newspaper, saying how she is very, very much against the conviction of Amiram. This is an issue that almost anybody who believes in the rule of law and anybody who believes in fairness of the judicial system in Israel can agree upon. Left and right and center can agree that a person who has no evidence against them at all, and the only evidence is a confession that was coerced through torture methods, everybody can agree that a conviction like that is something that is unjust in the extreme. And something that as if we want to live in a society where the rule of law is the norm, where somebody can't be picked up on a whim. He was picked up on a whim, Rabbi Weissman. He was picked up on a whim. We still don't understand why. He apparently was on some kind of a list of troublemakers in Judea and Samaria. Nobody really understands the reasons he was picked up. But he has said that he was tortured, and his lawyer, actually last night, I was at a demonstration in front of the Supreme Court where his lawyer, an individual by the name Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is a Knesset member, said that he met him at the 21 days, at the end of the 21 days, and this man was broken. He was broken. He had been tortured physically, mentally, emotionally, and he would have said anything. This conviction is a sham, and as people who believe in the rule of law and people who believe in fairness should be outraged by that. This has gone this far, that he's been out to sit in jail for 6.5 years, and they brought an example of 3 Arabs that were convicted of torching a house during the last war, and they were interrogated and they were put in jail. And at the end, it was proven that they weren't there. It was proven that they were in another place. There was a camera that placed them at the scene at the time of the crime in another place, and they were let off the hook, and then even sued Israel for false imprisonment. These confessions, forced confessions, are wrong, and we need to do everything in our power to stop those type of methods, and by association, make sure that Amiram ben Uliel is let out of jail.
Listen, if this happened in a different country, if let's say in China or Saudi Arabia or in Iran, a Jew was arrested and tortured and convicted of a crime, the whole world would be outraged. The entire Jewish people would be outraged. And when it happens in Israel, it seems to get very little coverage and very little outrage. How do you explain that?
You know, that's a very, very good, very good point. It's a very, we're in a, you know, building and being in a Jewish state is a very, very complicated thing. Sometimes things are done here in such a way to try to make sure to show the world, see, even though we are settling the land, if there's a crime committed by a Jew, we're going to come down on him like a ton of bricks. You know, Judaism says, the Jewish law says that a person can never be convicted by a confession. Our rabbis told us, "Ein adam mesim atzmo rasha." A person cannot be convicted through methods that have to do with personal confessions, and even more than that, if he's a forced confession, it just boggles the mind that this is the level that they've come to try to convict somebody. And at the end of the day, there's somebody running around somewhere that committed this crime, that committed this horrible act. And there are, according, there are so many things about this, so many details about this case. There were a number of arsons in this particular village before and after the arson had killed the Doamsha family in Duma. And there was a pattern of fights between families in this particular area and in other Arab towns. Those particular, that pattern of arson wasn't investigated properly. There are a lot of questions here, even according to the confession. There are many issues here that don't seem to make sense, but they had their man, and they've decided that he's guilty. Go figure.
Yeah, I actually read somewhere, correct me if I'm wrong, that some of the members of the family actually admitted that Ben Uliel had nothing to do with it. Is that true? Or other Arab neighbors?
Yeah, you know, there are many unsubstantiated and substantiated rumors that the people living in the village are obviously they're not very sympathetic to Jews and not sympathetic to settlers, but they know, the guy in the street knows in Duma that Amiram did not do this. In other words, they know that it was a family feud. That if this was the only arson, then there could be maybe some question. But there were arsons before and after in different houses. It's documented, and the police did not investigate those other arsons in an aggressive way, and didn't want to connect those arsons to this particular arson. We don't know who did this. Maybe another Arab family did it. Maybe another individual did it. What we do know is that Amiram did not do it, and there's not one shred of evidence. This isn't something of speculation. I am not speculating now. This is an agreed upon detail, that there isn't one detail of the one shred, of evidence, not forensic evidence, not physical evidence, not eyewitnesses that saw Amiram at the scene of the crime. There were tire marks, there were boot marks, nothing matched. There was graffiti, there were 2 sets of graffiti that were left. None of them matched Amiram's handwriting, and they didn't match each other either. There's so many holes in this. And how, I mean, we were brought up in the United States according to the legal tenet of guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That's something that anybody who grew up in the United States, it's like as American as baseball and apple pie. There's so much doubt in this. How can you take a person and take him away from his family and from his wife and from his child for so many years on a confession that was taken through torture methods? It's mind-boggling. We fully expect that the Supreme Court now will strike down this travesty. I mean, we still believe, many people still believe in the justice system here. The judges are fair, and the judges will do the right thing, and we fully believe that these judges will do the right thing. It is incomprehensible that we're even talking about this. It is incomprehensible that we need to discuss this. And the fact that in a Jewish state, a travesty of justice like this could happen to this individual is painful. It's troublesome, to say the least, and we need to speak out. And I really want to thank you, Hanania, Rabbi Weissman, for giving me the opportunity to talk about this, to vent, which is so important, that people should know that this isn't a right-wing cause. This is a cause of justice. We don't want to be living in a society where some member of the Israeli Secret Service will pick up somebody and force him to say things he doesn't want to say, and force him to confess to a crime that he doesn't commit. It's horrible.
Right. Well, I would challenge one small thing, which is not a small thing, is that you said this is a Jewish state. We're really not living in a Jewish state. We're living in a state that has a lot of Jewish people and has some Jewish flavor and culture to it. But as you mentioned earlier, the Torah law is a person cannot convict himself of any crime except the monetary crime. If a person, according to Torah law, says I stole $50 from somebody, then the Beis Din, the court, can obligate him to pay back what he stole. But a person in a capital crime cannot convict himself. If he walks into a court without being tortured on his own, he feels guilty and says, I murdered somebody, Beis Din is going to throw him out of court and they're going to do nothing to him. That's the Torah law. And maybe this is a wake-up call. I think it should be a wake-up call that we really need an authentic Jewish state that's run according to Torah law. This is not a Jewish state. A Jewish state is where the Torah is the law of the land. His only crime is that he wasn't able to stand up to torture for a full 21 days. That's the only thing that he's guilty of. If he was able to stand up to torture longer, then he wouldn't be in prison. And
you're absolutely right. And in some of the things you say here, we haven't gotten to the optimum point that we want. Okay. There are obviously many things that are in the judicial system here in Israel that are contrary to the halakha and contrary to the Shulchan Aruch and contrary to Jewish law, and we're trying to slowly make the law of the land more Jewish. Absolutely. And the fact that the only part of the evidence against him is so contrary to Jewish law here makes this all the more difficult. I agree with that. It makes this all the more difficult. And what's the call of action? What, after we're talking and we're discussing this so much, and we're venting and we're trying to make sense out of a tragedy. It's a tragedy. And if God forbid that the judges don't release him, it will be even more of an extreme tragedy. What can we do other than vent? So I think that if we can get to a point where we're going to try as time continues to make sure that something like this can't happen again. We're at a weak point. We're at a weak point that he's already been convicted. And now the judges have to overturn the conviction of other judges. That's a difficult thing to do from a psychological point of view, from an emotional point of view. I hope they do it anyway because it's the right thing. But we have to be in a position where this doesn't happen again, where if a crime is committed, then the only way that anybody can be convicted is the basis of evidence, on the basis of real evidence on the ground, and not through these coerced confessions. The same people that torture Arabs for crimes that they think they committed are the same people that can torture Jews. We have to come out and say torture is wrong. It's wrong, and it can never be right except for something on the extreme end. If another crime is about to be committed and people might die, God forbid, to use extreme methods to get information out of an individual. Those are the extreme ends that are many times not the case in criminal matters. And we want to make this place more Jewish, Rabbi Weissman, absolutely. But we can only do that. It's a long process. We've been working on it for about 100 years. And we're going forward. We have setbacks, but we are going forward, in my estimation.
Okay, I personally believe that there shouldn't even be torture in cases of ticking time bombs. I don't believe that we should be teaching people to be sadists or teaching people how to break other people. That's not the Jewish way. I mean, when we're fighting a war, I actually sent out an article today. I'm not a bleeding heart. I believe that when we're fighting our enemies, we should beat the hell out of them until they come crawling to us to stop. And then we beat them a little more, and then we stop, that we totally vanquish our enemies. However, I don't believe torture is ever acceptable, even in a case of a ticking time bomb, although I understand that people feel differently about that one. I think if we can get rid of 99% of the torture and make the law that, except in the most really extreme cases, and it's provable that this is a truly extreme case, I would be satisfied with that, at least for the time being. That would be just a baseline to start with.
I completely agree with that assessment. There should be like a special tribunal of 3 judges that are just set up just for that particular extreme. There was cases like that in the United States in Guantanamo Bay, that there was extreme methods done because they expected some a terrible terrorist attack to happen, and even that was vilified by many in the United States. I agree. How can we get to a point where a person he's the one responsible for inflicting torture on another human being? It's unfair. It's not Jewish. It's when I was many years ago, when I was in the reserve duty here, there were cases of the Israeli army catching rock throwers and very, very bad people, and they were tied up. And they asked me, I was in a position I was an officer in the Israeli army at the time, and they asked me, what do you think? People came by and they gave them cheap shots. They gave them cheap shots. I said, what are you doing? First of all, it was against the Israeli army law. But besides that, what are you doing? As Jews, we're going to stop. We're going to be kicking. We're going to be getting a person a cheap shot who's tied up. That isn't the way to go. That isn't what we want to show the world. That isn't the way what we want to do. And in this particular case, the person who committed the torture on Amiram, and we know who that is. We know who that is. That person should be prosecuted. He broke the law. That person should be put in jail. That's the next step. If Amiram is let out, we're going to go after this individual who did this to Amiram. It's against Israeli law what he did, and we're going to go after him. That's another thing that we're going to try to do with Honenu. We're trying to, first of all, we want to get Amiram out of jail. We want a law passed that this never can happen again to anybody, to Jew, to Arab, to anybody. And after we do that, we're going to try to find out who perpetrated this outrage and put him in jail. That's the right thing to do. That's the right way.
According to the law in Israel, the government can arrest anybody at any time without even giving them a reason for arresting them. They can hold them for up to 3 months, I believe. It's called administrative detention. This is a holdover from the Ottoman law. Are there any efforts to change that? I mean, you can't just have the police arresting anybody.
Very embarrassing. You're bringing up all the embarrassing points, Rabbi Weissman.
Because that's the only way they're going to change. You're absolutely
right. That's administrative detention. There's a judge who can decide on there's many, most of the administrative detentions are against Arabs, but they're also administered against Jews. We should also be against that in principle. And also that should only be allowed in the extreme, again, that 1% that you mentioned earlier, that extreme, that there has to be a large panel of judges to decide on such an issue, because there's from what I heard yesterday, there's a 16-year-old Arab kid. He's probably not a wonderful Jew lover, probably not, but he's in administrative detention now. A 16-year-old kid, an Arab kid. That's an outrage as far as I'm concerned. I can't understand it. He should be put in jail. He should be put in front of a judge. I mean, a 16-year-old child in administrative detention, does that make sense?
None of it makes sense.
To me, it doesn't make sense. I'm not on the level of deciding such a thing. I don't think that a 16-year-old kid should be in administrative detention.
I don't think anybody should. I don't think anybody should be thrown into jail without being guilty of a crime. You can't just pick people up because you're trying to make an example out of somebody or flex your muscles or you're bored on a particular day. You just round people up and throw them in jail because it makes you feel good.
I agree with you. And Honenu, our organization, obviously is trying to defend people that have been charged with nationalistic crimes. But we have we don't want. We're fair people, and we would like the rule of law to be established, and especially it's so blatant in this case that we're hoping that the appeal that's happening as we speak, it's incredible that we're talking. It's like we're talking during halftime of this most important game here. It's the appeal is happening today. Victor Feldman has been talking for hours to the judges about this case, and we're confident that the judges will understand the travesty of this. And if this gets around the world, and it's to all your listeners, that people who listen to this podcast, this will get around, and people will start understanding that this is injustice not on Amiram, but injustice on us all. And we need to focus to try to rectify all this.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, this is my small way of helping the situation. I'm not a lawyer. There's really nothing I can do beyond giving you a platform, giving people the opportunity to learn more about it, to spread the word, to create a public outrage from all segments of society. That's the only way things are going to change. And of course, most of all, people need to pray. One of our listeners to put a comment in the chat box, can we have his and his mother's name so we can pray for him? Because really, every legal case is happening in heaven.
Anybody that contacts me directly, I will send the name, all the Jewish names that are relevant. People were saying Tehillim today, and people were davening a different way. We have to do both. We have to try to change. We have to try to change. You know, many people they look at Amiram. He looks with his long peyot and his very Haredi looking, the way he looks. And they arrest him. They put him in jail. Oh, they assume, oh, he must be guilty. He must be guilty. And nobody, and very few people understand that this extreme case is only of confession through torture, only of confession through torture. And when they understand that, then they'll say, hey, something is wrong here. We're letting the real person who did this off the hook, and we're putting an innocent man in jail. And there's almost nothing more horrible than an innocent man languishing in jail for something he didn't do. It's mind-boggling. We shouldn't be able to sleep at night over such a thing.
I would say also that the media is very guilty for what happened, because when the story first broke and for a long time afterwards, much of the media was assuming his guilt. And when the conviction came in, they focused more on the fact that a court convicted him than on the whole process that was involved. And especially because he looks like a settler, and the settlers are evil, and they're trying to paint them for their own agenda. They lost sight of the human rights issue. And I would go so far to say that maybe that's why all of Israel is suffering under tyranny these days. Maybe it's sort of a punishment because so much of society looked the other way when certain other Jews that maybe they don't like, that brand of Judaism or those style of Jews are getting abused by the government, and they're even happy that it's happening to them. Well, if you allow it to happen to people that you don't like, eventually it's going to come back and hurt people that you do like, and you know, as well. Eventually it's going to hit closer to home. So
you've opened up in a whole nother can of worms here, Rabbi Weissman, because
that's the reason why I'm here.
You've opened up another can of worms. There is a group in Israel that's being vilified. They're called Noar Agvot. Noar Agvot in English means the hilltop youth. Yep. That's the pseudo name of this so-called marauding militia. This is all what's in the news, that seem to go from Arab town to Arab town and perpetrate violence. Okay, and nothing can be further from the truth. The truth of the matter is that I live in an area near Gush Etzion. I'm here right now. You can see the mountains of Gush Etzion. And almost every day there are Molotov cocktails that are thrown not too far from my house. Rocks and Molotov cocktails and knifings and shootings. That somebody just stole from our own only quiet leadership. They just stole a gun on Thursday. Who knows what's going to happen with that? Violence day in and day out. And when something happens that goes the other way a little bit, then the whole world talks about. Now the whole world is busy with Putin in Russia, but in other instances, the whole world talks about the smallest instance where a Jew would throw a rock back or defend himself or shoot in the air or do whatever he has to do. The hilltop youth who have been pushed to the corner because the Israeli security model here is not to try to instigate any new intifada, any new Arab rebellion, often does not deal with the security situation as it should be dealt with. And because it's not dealt with in the right way, these hilltop youth sometimes don't have too much of a choice, and they need to defend themselves. And that defense of themselves gets turned into vigilante activities. In other words, what is when somebody's defending himself, he gets a rock thrown at him, and he takes out his gun and he shoots in the air, or even shoots to kill. Somebody wants to kill his kid. If you have your kid in the car and somebody's throwing rocks, you're going to shoot to kill. You're going to defend your children. And when that happens, that's called vigilante militaristic activities. Then these hilltop youth get pushed into a corner. They get pushed into a corner and they're vilified, and that's patently unfair. I know, I've been there. I've lived here for 40 years. I know my windows have been broken many, many times by rocks. I haven't been hit with a Molotov cocktail yet, thank God. But I know people who have. I know people whose bodies have been burned in cars. I know a lot of this stuff is things that happen, and the hilltop youth here are vilified. Amiram and Uliel is labeled as one of these hilltop problems. That's one of he was arrested. That's one of the reasons he was convicted. That's one of the reasons his confession was coerced from him, because he's the bad guy, Rabbi Weissman. Do you understand? He's the bad guy. He's the bad guy. He's the militia, and we're going to come down on these militias. So that's essentially what one of the background top youth are in a position of having to try to defend when the Israeli army isn't doing its job enough here in Judea and Samaria to protect Jews.
Yeah, your sound quality has been fluctuating. If you can find a more stable location, I don't know if you're walking while you're talking, but the sound has been really iffy throughout. The only way that I
is that I'm going to just stand in one spot.
Yeah, let's try that. I think it'll be better. The only way that I see things really changing is I believe for the mentality of the hilltop youth, the extreme right wingers, as they're called. I don't like all these labels, but that's how the media portrays them. For people like that who are like basically in a ghetto bunker mentality at this point because they feel isolated from the rest of society, they have to somehow break out of that stereotype and unify with, more of the general Israeli public and get their story out to them, because the media is not going to do them any favors. When crimes are happening, when crimes of this nature are happening in other segments of society, I would like to see, the settler types with the big payas and the big yarmulkes going and protesting with the other Jews that they might not have all that much in common with, and then they would return the favor. I see that those bridges kind of have to be crossed because it is a common issue. When it comes to politics and settling the land and Judaism, there's obviously going to be a big gulf between them. But when it comes to basic issues like torture, human rights, things like that, they've got to be able to get
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I know of politicians here in Israel on the left wing. I'm very friendly with a number of them because we have things in common. We've been into the army together, and we love the country in different ways. In different ways, we love the country. But they are very, very against any of these torture methods, and and if we can somehow build this bridge that you're referring to, of saying, you know what, we are against torture for any human being, where any human friend or foe, we are against those two. If we can build that bridge, then maybe the suffering of Amiram for these 6 years, with God's help, he'll come out. There would be a reason for that suffering. Maybe we can find some kind of a silver lining in this dark cloud of horror that he's been in solitary confinement in such extreme conditions. There was a lawyer there, if people remember, the lawyer who represented John Demjanjuk, the alleged Ivan the Terrible,
the Nazi,
from Sobibor. There was a lawyer, a very famous lawyer here in Israel, represented him. Sheftel is his name, and he said that the condition of Amiram's detention is worse than it was for Demjanjuk. It's horrible. They're
David, we didn't lose him. Looks like we lost David.
Me?
Yeah, David, we lost you there for about half a minute.
All right. So I was saying that his lawyer, Demyanuk's lawyer, was asked to help Amiram, and he refused. He said the detention of him is worse than it was for Demyanuk of Amiram ben Uliel. So when he gets out, and he will get out, he has to get out. We will shake the world. We will go to the. I don't know what we're going to do. We're not going to rest until this travesty is fixed. We can't fathom that he's going to continue to stay in jail, and we're hoping for good news in the coming days and weeks that the courts will actually let him out, and maybe we'll start trying to build this bridge that we're referring to.
I really hope so. Look, you also brought up prison conditions. This is something else that I wanted to talk about more in a larger picture, not just in this particular case. I don't understand how Israel could have dungeons. I mean, even if somebody is guilty of a crime and they have to go to prison for a certain period of time, that doesn't mean that they have to be in solitary confinement, basically being tortured in prison, even if not physically, but to be living in squalor, in filth, in isolation. They're still human beings. They still have a right, being locked in prison, even if people are locked in homes, when the government had lockdowns, which is a separate problem, that was torture enough. People were living under house arrest, essentially, in their own homes, and a lot of people broke from that. So even if a prisoner is living in the best of conditions, but he's not allowed to leave the facility, that is punishment enough. They don't have to be living in a filthy squalor either. And I would go a step further and say maybe this is something that long term your group would be able to help fix. And that is that if the government is going to arrest people and hold them in custody before they're convicted of a crime, they should be held in a 5-star hotel on the government's expense. And if they are vindicated of the crime, they should be compensated for damages for all of their time lost, time away from family. And that maybe would make them think twice before they start rounding up people. You can't just round somebody up and throw them into a prison and treat him like filth, but you've got to hold them in a 5-star hotel and pay for it.
You're absolutely right. And they have a lot of all these maloniot. They have these little hotels empty after the corona available. They have them all
I'm serious.
available. They're empty now.
All of these people are innocent. All of these people are innocent
some of the
until proven guilty.
The conditions of some of the Arab detainees isn't so bad. I actually, going back to my reserve duty, I did reserve duty once at an Arab prison in Megiddo, and the conditions there were not terrible. I mean, being in prison isn't a great thing because they didn't want the prisoners to riot. They were together and they didn't want the prisoners to riot. The prison conditions particularly for Jewish terrorists, and that's what they're calling this Amiram ben Uliel, are horrific, and we're working to fix that too. We're working on a couple of things here to try to improve his incarceration, that it shouldn't be as extreme as it is. We're working on it. We got work to do. There was a very big demonstration last night, right before the decision today. Itamar, the first lawyer that I mentioned, Itamar Ben-Gvir, was speaking there. He was speaking about the conditions that he was under. He was speaking about how broken this particular man was. Why isn't the person who did the torture, perpetrated the torture on him, in jail? Why isn't anybody investigating that? I don't have the answers to. I don't have the answers to everything. Some of the things I have the answers to. And we're working very, very hard and from a lot of different areas to try to make sure that that this doesn't happen again. And you're a big part of this now. You're a part of our effort, Rabbi Weissman, and your podcast.
Well, I'm a very small part of it, but I really hope it makes a difference. Again, long term, if hopefully the judges will do the right thing. I'm very skeptical of the legal system in Israel. I don't think we're dealing with good people. I think the judges and the whole legal system is garbage. It needs to be thrown away. But let's say, God forbid, the judges follow orders, let's say, and they don't do the right thing. What would be the next steps, or are there any further steps that you would be able to take legally?
You're asking. You do these podcasts very well, Rabbi Weissman, because you're always asking the right questions. You're always asking the right questions. The next step, if God forbid he doesn't get let out, that we're going to continue we're going to continue the fight. and we'll ask for clemency we have a petition going now. We have almost 1,000 signatures on the petition. It started a few days ago. We're going to get 50,000, and we'll get 100,000. We're going to get people from all over the world, Jew and Gentile, to sign on this petition, and we're going to try to do whatever we can from our legal point of view, demonstrations and petitions and anything that we need to do to wake up the people, maybe for a retrial. Our legal options, all the options are open to try to get Amiram out of jail. He has to come out of jail either through the judge or through clemency from the president of the country. And there have been cases like this that people have been let out through clemency. We're not giving up. In other words, we're not going to give up until he is a free man. We are convinced. I am convinced, and our organization is convinced. As well as so many others, as many people on the left side of the political spectrum are convinced that this man is innocent. This man is innocent, and let's go after the people who did this. Let's find who they are and put them in jail. We can't use a scapegoat of a guy that broke after 17 days, started talking because he was afraid of his life. He was denied food. He was tied up. His back was stretched. He was not given enough sleep or any sleep. He was mentally and emotionally tortured, and he broke. Most people, if not all people, would have broken under such conditions. Everybody can say, "Oh, I would have been the tough guy. I wouldn't have broken." He's a young man in great condition, and he was broken by it. They know exactly what to do, these interrogators. So we're not giving up. We're not giving up. We're going to try to get all the forces, every organization that believes in justice to help us. And there are a lot of those justice-minded people that are willing to help.
Well, I hope everybody who's listening, especially those who are hearing about this for the first time, or maybe they didn't really know the full story and their stomachs are turning. What's the best way that the average person can help the cause?
The average person can help the cause, first of all, by knowing the facts, knowing what actually happened. Don't believe me. Go online. Go into our website, honenu.org. Look at the Duma case. Look at what's been written. Determine for yourself that this is an injustice. Don't believe what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the truth, but don't base what your opinions on what I'm saying. Look at the articles, read about it, find out how Honenu, our organization is representing him pro bono. We're not taking any money from his poor wife. She spoke at the means to defense. We've hired a Victor Feldman, who is the premium lawyer in Israel. I don't even know how much he's getting paid. A lot, I'm sure. He believes in this cause. I've heard his interview, but all these things do cost a lot of money. This isn't about money. This is about justice. This is about if somebody reading about this decides that he wants to help our organization fund the lawyers who are defending these people, then that's fine too. It's all good. What we're looking for is broad support from a broad spectrum of people on the left, on the right, on the middle, Jew, Gentile, religious, non-religious, good people out there that believe in truth and justice, and that momentum that started a few months ago, leading up to this appeal and this podcast and others like it, and other information and petitions and demonstrations will try to wake up to what's really going on, and not have Amiram as the scapegoat of a horrible crime that was committed. It was a horrible crime, and we are against such things. We are absolutely against such horrible crimes. But the correct person who committed the crime, he's the one who should be in jail, and not Amiram. He did not commit the crime. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, the only shred of so-called evidence that they have is a partial confession that they tortured out of him. Even the judges admitted as much, that there was no evidence. What was the basis or the reasoning of the judges who convicted him based on evidence that they themselves admitted was highly flawed.
They said something a little bizarre. I have to say, they said that after the torture was over, then he restated the confession, not under the conditions of torture at that minute.
Oh.
In other words, but that's completely ridiculous because he was afraid he was going to get tortured again. I mean, that's completely bizarre, that logic. You don't have to be a lawyer or a judge to think that that's a bizarre logic. I mean, the woman who just wrote that article today for Haaretz against torture mentioned that in an article. He was scared to death to say anything that they didn't want him to say.
And they're also setting the legal precedent. They're also setting the legal precedent that this is okay, that they can do that to you or me or anybody else, that they can torture them and then stop torturing us and say, well, what do you have to say now?
Right. In the United States, that type of evidence is thrown out of court, Rabbi Weissman. It's thrown out of court. It is completely inadmissible. And if we're trying to tell the world that we're a democracy and we have a fair judiciary, sometimes it's true. Our democracy is very fragile and our judiciary is fragile. That should be thrown out. It should be like American style. It should that type of and if you want to convict somebody, bring evidence. Let's get to work and bring some evidence, not one shred of evidence. And they try to convict them on the basis of the fact that there are details that only he would know. And there's a detail of a black car that allegedly was there, that they believe the Arab residents of Duma said it was two people and not one people, and the judges decided that they wouldn't believe part of the testimony and they decided they would believe another part of the testimony. It's a 72-page decision. We can't in an hour go through all the details, but it's very, very no real shred of evidence, a little bit of circumstantial, a little bit of associative evidence. And Amiram didn't have a clue when they started the reenactment of the crime. He didn't know what to do. He was told what to do by the person who was torturing him. That's not something I'm making up. That's in all the newscasts and all the descriptions of the reenactment, this bizarre reenactment that he had, scared. When, according to the law, the reenactment has to be done with no one that's connected to any of the details of the crime. So he can't hint to the man reenacting the crime what actually happened. It has to be, and the person who was interrogating him was the one who was walking him through the reenactment. There's so many mistakes here, so many bizarre twists here. The man should be out of jail. He should be out of jail. Maybe after the podcast, we'll hear some good news. I'm hoping. I'm praying and hoping.
Well, I'm really hoping. Look, I mean, God is the ultimate judge. Every person who tortured him and was involved in this travesty of justice is going to be punished, and they are cursed and they should be punished. And they need to do everything that they can now to rectify this, to minimize the crimes that they've done and the sins against man and God that they've done. I am praying for God to punish them all. I'm not a violent person, but God's really got to whack these people because they have it coming to them. I know maybe you can't say that, but I can say that. These people, my blood boils every time I read about this or hear about this. This cannot be going on in a Jewish state. And seriously, Torah needs to be the law of the land because that's the only way that we can move forward as a Jewish state. Any final thoughts?
I have some final thoughts. I first of all, I want to thank you so much for the effort you went to do this in an hour that wasn't very, very, very compatible for you. And especially today that the appeal is happening, how important this is for us to try to do whatever we can to wake up people to this travesty. We need to come together. There are more things that we can identify together with and we disagree upon. All good people who seek justice and who seek fairness need to come together and say, this is not the way it's supposed to work. This is not the way you solve a crime. This is not the way you find the people who perpetrated this. We have to do this in a lawful way. If we have to find evidence, we have to find, and they're very good at finding people who really did these crimes. And they've been wrong before, especially on confessions, forced confessions. They've been wrong many times, and we can't let this continue. This can't fly. This can't fly, and we can't sit back and accept this under any condition. And that basic idea is something that we have to keep with us. And hopefully the judges will make the right decision. But God forbid they don't make the right decision. We're not giving up until Amiram is a free man.
Well, David Waldman, thank you for joining us, for sharing all of this important information. God should be with you and with Amiram. Get him out of jail immediately and bring true justice to the, both the perpetrators of the crime. They should be found, and we have to change the system that nothing like this can ever happen again.
Keep up the good work, Rabbi Weissman.
All right. Amen. Thank you.
All the best.